Akotsu versus Kenjaku. Who wins in a fair one-on-one fight? Let's talk about it. But first, if you're not caught up on the manga, you might want to keep scrolling because we're going to have to talk about certain feats and spoilers and all that jazz. All right, first things first, let's just set the stage really quickly. This is not what we're talking about. We are talking about a one-on-one, no outside interference, no one gets the jump on anybody else, level playing field. Now, honestly, this video could be 20 minutes long, right? We could go over everyone's feats and glean every little piece of information we can from that and then compare and contrast, right? But I don't think that's necessary because of what you're seeing here behind me. I think that tells us more than anything we need to know. The fact that Team Good Guy had to plan this elaborate distraction using Takaba and jumping Kenjaku in this way should tell you that there is not a high level of confidence in Akotsu being able to just beat Kenjaku one-on-one. So that's gonna be my stance. I think in a fair fight, Kenjaku beats Yuta. Now, I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me, and that's fine, because Akotsu has been showing out in these recent chapters. Like, he's no pushover, but I still gotta give the edge to Kenny because, again, first, they had to jump him like this to begin with. But a possible counter to that could be that they wanted Akotsu to, retain as much of his strength as possible for the Sukuna fight. So if you can get the jump on Kenny like this, you would, right? Even if Akotsu could theoretically beat him one-on-one. So again, I will say that's a fair counter argument, but I still think the needle leans a little bit more toward he couldn't beat him one-on-one and they had to do this. Now, like I mentioned, I'm not going to go through a list of every single feat, but I do want to bring up a couple of points that I think help support what I'm saying here. And the first is the characters literally themselves saying they cannot defeat Kenjaku through conventional means. They've tried and they've failed, specifically with Yuki and Choso 2v1ing Kenjaku, and Yuki, just like Yuta, is a special grade sorcerer. This entire fight really felt like Kenjaku was 3 steps ahead, and it really didn't feel as if he was ever truly in danger, except for maybe the black hole moment. Now, don't get me wrong, Yuta is no slouch, plus he's been training a lot since the moments that we're referencing. So if we want to say that Akotsu is stronger than Yuki plus Choso, I'm fine with that. But again, we gotta remember that Kenjaku really wasn't sweating that much during the fight. There were a couple of close calls, sure, but the entire fight he was kind of like probing them and testing them, not even using the full capabilities of his techniques. Like Yuki guessed, he might have up to 4, and we definitely did not see him use them all. So now that we've gotten that background information out of the way, let's just talk about the fight itself. And I think this ultimately comes down to the domain clash, right? And in that regard, I think Kenjaku just outshines Akotsu. And if that's the case, the fight's over. Tengen, who is regarded as like the pinnacle of barrier techniques in Jujutsu, says Kenjaku is one of a few who can equal me. And this is before they knew he had a barrierless domain expansion. And thanks to the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, we now know what happens when a barrierless domain interacts with a normal domain expansion. And while we don't know for sure how big Kenjaku's barrierless domain is, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to assume that it is, or at least could be, bigger than Akotsu's normal domain. And if that is the case, he can just destroy Akotsu's domain from the outside. And at that point, it's checkmate. However, it might not even get to that point, because remember, in the Gojo Sukuna fight, their domains were stated to be equally refined, and that's why they were canceling each other's sure hit effects out. In the case of Akotsu and Kenjaku, I'm not so sure they would be equally refined, because again, Kenjaku is on par with Tengen with his barrier techniques, plus the man's 1,000 years old. He probably has this down a bit better than Akotsu does, because Akotsu is not Gojo. However, let's just play devil's advocate here and look at a couple of the other hypotheticals. If we assume Akotsu's domain is more refined, meaning he wins the domain clash outright, then that would just be his win condition. He could just run up to Kenjaku, open the domain, and it's over. And if that were the case, that would have just been the plan. They wouldn't have had to do this whole Takaba catch Kenjaku off guard thing. For our next hypothetical, let's assume that the domains are equally refined, just like Gojo Sukuna, which means the sure hit effects are going to cancel out. Also, let's just assume that they're the exact same size, meaning Kenjaku's won't destroy Akotsu's from the outside. So at that point, they're on equal playing fields inside the domains, and they've just got their normal bag of tricks. However, Akotsu is still going to have the infinite swords with all of the curse techniques. That's a big benefit for him. But Kenjaku is going to have his bag of tricks too. We don't know fully what his domain does, so it's entirely possible that it could be more than we've seen. So I think I would still give the edge to Kenjaku here, just due to the 1,000 years of experience and the general intelligence level. This is the smartest person in the story that we've seen so far. So I would still edge it out to him, but I would say that it's clearly possible for Akotsu to win under those conditions. But remember, that was assuming a lot of things going in Akotsu's favor to even begin with. Anyways, I've been yapping about this far longer than I intended to. This basically boils down to I think Kenjaku would win a domain clash, which means he wins the battle. And I think the evidence that we've seen in the story doesn't contradict that. It doesn't necessarily for sure say that Kenjaku would win, but I'm not sure you can really point to anything that shows that Akotsu would for sure win. So that's where I stand on it. I know that's going to make some people mad, but what else are anime debates for? Finally, I want to give a special shout out to Edwin for sponsoring this video. And Edwin also had another question about what Yuta might have meant by saying we cheated in the most recent chapter. And I put out a whole video on this for anybody that wants to go into that further. But Edwin is wondering if maybe somebody has a time manipulation curse technique that allowed everyone to train with like a hyperbolic time chamber type situation. I think that's entirely possible. I do think that if we were going to go that route in the story, though, it probably makes more sense just to use the sumo guy's simple domain, since that's something that was already established, as opposed to just introducing a new character or new curse technique at least that did the same thing. But at this point, I'm honestly not ruling anything out because who knows what Gege's got in store for us. But Edwin, thank you again, man, and I will see y'all in the next one.